Tony Plog. I'm really excited to be here and be able to do an interview with you.
It's good to have you back at the house.
Yeah, great, thanks. I remember when I took lessons with you, it was a couple of weeks before my exam actually, and I was playing Vasily Brandt, second concert piece.
Oh, okay.
And everything you said was, Daniel, do you know Tchaikovsky's violin concert?
Oh, really? Okay.
And I said, no. And you said,
who's Tchaikovsky?
You check out it. And I did, and it really changed my approach to this. I played it completely different afterwards. And it was a great experience to me. So what I really learned there was that it's really important to listen to all kinds of music, all kinds of instrumentalists, singers, and so on.
Yeah,
could you?
For sure. Yeah, actually, speaking of Tchaikovsky, we had a visiting professor, actually not a visiting professor, but violin professor in the Musikhochschule, come and do a master class for us. I invited a lot of different professors to do trumpet master classes because it was interesting for them. They had never done trumpet master classes, and also for the trumpets to think outside the box. And so he came in, and I asked him to talk about Russian music, which was fascinating because he was Russian, and he also played some Tchaikovsky, and he played it the way a normal violinist would play it, and then he played it the way a Russian violinist would play it, which was fascinating. And you could really hear Russia in the way he played it. Just like, since you're living in Finland, if you hear a Finnish orchestra or a Scandinavian orchestra play Sibelius, it's phrased and it sounds differently than an American orchestra. Although American orchestras are catching on and playing more in the original style. But I think that's really important. I mean, I think everything informs everything else, and everything's related. Since we're in Germany, I mean, one of the most famous German authors is Hermann Hesse, and the Glass Bead Game, I don't know if you know that book or not, wonderful book, and it talks about how everything is related. And so I think the more you can inform yourself about any type of culture or history or whatever, the better you'll be. I asked Nicholas Chumachenko is the name of this violinist, and I asked him about that sort of thing. I think I specifically asked him if he did a lot of reading, and he told a story about Horowitz, that when Horowitz was, I think, 9 years old, he had a piano lesson from Scriabin. And even though he was 9 years old, he was already Horowitz. I guess he could just really play. So he played one etude, and Scriabin said, "Great, it sounds great. See you. Thanks." and he said, "But aren't you going to teach me anything?" And Scriabin said, "Know everything. Thank you." And Horowitz told that story when he was 85, and he said, I really tried to follow that. And by what he meant was try to know about philosophy, about psychology, about art, about ballet, whatever, just about sports, just as much as you can about life, and that's going to inform, I think, how you approach a specific piece, how you approach your life, and so forth.
And it already started, I read on your blog, you call it music illiterate.
Oh,
what do you call it? Sometimes people even don't know the accompaniment. They know their own part only, or even if it's an excerpt for some audition, they only know this tiny piece. They don't know the whole piece. They don't know what the others are doing. Yeah,
that happens everywhere I go. To a certain extent or to a large extent. For example, in Norway, I've done some tests at the Norwegian Music Academy with all the brass students, so about 30 brass students, and not one brass student was able to identify the beginning of Petrushka or the beginning of Beethoven's Ninth. Not one horn player was able to identify the beginning of Tchaikovsky's Fifth, right, the opening movement, or any trombone player, the Schumann-Rennisch Symphony, or any trumpet player, the Allegro from Leonore 3, that sort of thing. And the players that can identify those pieces, to me, they have a much better chance of winning an audition, and of course being a good member of an orchestra, because they know, or at least have an idea of what the piece is about.
Yeah, of course. Because also, I mean, if you only have your part, all you hear in your head, if you imagine the music is your part, you don't have the context. You actually don't know how to fit in.
And you can have fun with that in a way too. So, for example, like if one of the standard excerpts for trumpet is the Schumann Second Symphony, so you could practice that with a friend, and instead of playing octaves, which Schumann wrote, the friend can play the first violin part, which is in a very comfortable register, and try to phrase the way a violinist would phrase, and then you have a better idea of how the trumpet line fits into what the strings are doing, and try to play that sort of more lyrical, dolce way.
Yeah. So you can react to what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
You know when you lead, when you have to follow the other players, all this stuff. So that's a really important point. And also, I think also the technical aspects you need to practice for this particular piece.
Yeah.
They then they serve the music. It's not that, okay, I have practiced all the technique, now I know how to play the trumpet, but there's a reason why you practice.
Yeah, my favorite trumpet player in the world is Alan Dean, who is a professor at Yale, and I mean he has a lot of technique, but you never see it, and he plays all these different instruments. He plays a lot of cornetto. He can play great jazz, etc., etc. So I mean, and he reads all the time, and so when he plays, you never think of the performer. You just think of, it's a nice piece of music. And it's very sort of low-key, very subtle, but that's the kind of playing I'm drawn to, I think.
Kind of ideal.
Yeah, for me. I mean, there are a lot of players, and this is not to discount how great so many players are, a lot of trumpet soloists and players in orchestras who are phenomenal players. But I think I don't know, I tend to be more impressed by somebody who can just play a really simple melody beautifully, because that's not so easy to do. And boy, I sure hope it doesn't sound like I'm dishing on great trumpet players, because they're great and they're great musicians. But just at that high level, then, if somebody can just play something simply and expressively. I just heard the latest album of Ulla Edward Antonsson, and he's a phenomenal player. I mean, he's absolutely world class. And we're friends, and we had a meal together up in Oslo, and he gave me this latest recording, and the whole thing is great. But there are a couple of pieces from Grieg on there, and one is just a very simple melody, and it is so beautiful the way he plays it. And for me, that's the highlight of the whole album. And some other things he does, I listen to it and I think, wow, I could never have done that. That's fantastic. But it was that simple melody that really struck me.
So you would also say that it's not only the musical aspects you have to be informed about, but it's also the cultural context, what is the English word, epoch, the era.
Yeah. Well, it's not. I wouldn't say you have to. I don't think it's mandatory, but I just think. I mean, one thing that I think is actually, you interviewed Wolfgang Guggenberger, and he mentioned this to me, that one thing I think is really important is just curiosity. Just to try and keep learning about things. And so, if you have an idea of interpretation of a piece, hopefully 5 years from now, your idea will be a little bit different because you're growing and you're learning. So I think learning as much as you can about, for example, Baroque music, the way people would phrase with Baroque music on the original instruments, not because you have to be authentic or anything, but just because the music swings a little bit more. So yeah, I think to me it's just a process of trying to grow. Well,
what I meant, for example, if you take this Baroque, if you have the architecture, the art, the philosophy from these days, the literature.
Yeah.
I mean, all this can inform also the way you play. You have a different feeling when you imagine, okay, you're playing in the church and everything. This will have an effect on your playing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really easy to think when you're studying a certain type of music in the past, let's say Baroque music, for example, everything can be very academic. But if you really think, you think about things, if somebody 50 or 100 years from now is studying our time, it might seem academic, but we're just people, we get up in the middle of the night and go to the toilet, or you don't think about Bach that way,
Yeah, of course.
Thank God. So that's a really bad example. But I mean, these are people who were people, and they had their strengths and their weaknesses. And the great composers like Bach, of course, had this incredible genius, but and that should be revered. But he was also somebody who had to turn out a cantata a week, and was just sort of a craftsman doing his job. Just turned out his job was, came from another world. But I think just trying to learn as much as you can and trying to put it in a human context is very important.
Yeah, and this also includes, can you call it, knowledge about yourself? So you're aware of yourself, of your thoughts, of your concepts, of your bodies, what is happening there, what concepts you have, for example, about breathing. Do you think I have only to breathe here, or what is your idea of it? And this also will lead to different playing if we take this example of the body, if you kind of cooperate with your design, if you really check, okay, some teacher said you should do this, but did I really check, or do I just believe somebody?
That's a really interesting question, because teachers will have, and experts, I mean, there's some maybe fake people out there on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, but there's some really great people who will have differing opinions. But you can take any subject. You can take eating, and there are some people that say you should have a lot of carbohydrates, good carbohydrates in your diet. There are other people who say you should have a lot of proteins in your diet. There's one book that came out a number of years ago that said your diet should be based on your blood type. So there are all these experts, and they all have the facts to back them up. And so I think you just try to be open, and you try to make the best choice you can, and you try to find out what works for you. So especially in terms of interpretation, but also in terms of physical stuff. You try and find what are the commonalities of a good performance, or of musicianship. There's certain things I think to be musically, let's say, stable, that you should do. In general, you should emphasize strong beats and not emphasize weak beats unless you're a jazzer, and all these different things. But then it comes to a specific person, and they'll do it differently. So you could take your 5 favorite classical trumpet players in the world and have them play a Baroque piece, and have them play Haydn, just very standard things, or Hindemith, for example, and you're going to get 5 different performances. The differences may be small and they may be large. And I think that comes from the culture. I remember hearing, I got a recording of Dockschitzer playing the Hindemith. And it certainly wasn't my style, because of a lot of vibrato, and I think the tempos were a little bit faster. But that comes from his culture. There's a great, if anybody watches this, there's a wonderful thing on YouTube. I think if you just type in Bernstein, Gould, Brahms, and I think it was around 1960, 59, 60, 61, something like that. Leonard Bernstein performed the Brahms piano concerto with Glenn Gould. I almost said Mark Gould. And he walked out on stage first, and he said, I want to tell you that Mr. Gould is here, but I'd like to also tell you that this interpretation is not my interpretation. And he went on for about 5 minutes talking about this, but he also said Mr. Gould is a really fantastic musician, a very thoughtful and reflective musician, and even though I don't agree with this interpretation, I think it deserves to be heard. And I think that's so great, because music's not like sports. If you get in a swim event, or if you play a tennis match, it's very clear who wins. And it could be, in swimming, it could be 0.5 of a second or something like that. But in music, it's not that way. It's different. And so, I think you have to be open for all things. And also in terms of the physical aspect of playing, getting ideas from as many people as you can, I think is not a bad idea at all. I think some people think that can be confusing, but I'm not. I'm actually almost a fan of confusion, because I think that means you're still asking questions, and I don't think you should ever stop asking questions.
What would you say? What is the most important thing concerning technique? What should you practice?
I think and this is a really, really general answer, but I think you can apply it to just about everything, is to try and be relaxed and efficient in your playing. If you're having to force anything, I think it's not good. And I think a really good idea is if you're struggling with a passage, or if a passage is not working, go back and maybe even simplify the passage, and first play it in a way that's comfortable and relaxed. I mean, obviously, not lazy, but you have to be engaged with the air and everything. But that you can do a passage really well, and then expand on that, and that you can do that for musical ideas, and you can also do it for technical ideas. So, for example, if you would take, I use this example in the series of method books that I put out. If you take the last movement of the Haydn, etc. And let's say if you're not happy with the way you're playing that, either technically or musically, experiment. I'm a huge fan of experimentation. So first of all, you simplify it. So instead of going ba 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 ba, you go ba 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 ba, and then you start to think. Then you go deep, and you start to think, okay, if I'm going to play those 4 notes over 4 measures, how am I going to play them? What's my direction going to be? Am I going to go ba 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 ba, or ba 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 ba, or ba 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 ba, or ba 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 ba? So there are a lot of different things to think about, and that's individual. Your choice may be totally different from my choice, but once you figure out what you want to do with that, then suppose you go ba 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 ba, so you crescendo the 3rd bar, and then you diminuendo again. Not much of a crescendo or diminuendo, just direction. But if you do that, then you practice that as beautifully as you can. So it's just not notes, but it's a really nice phrase. And then you start to add the other notes. And then when you get into the 16th, and then you listen very carefully, and if it's still not particularly good, then you can use the stamp idea of staying up and staying down. Stay down when you go up, stay up when you go down, and you can find the right position. But I'd say first start with something that's rather simple or quite simple, and play that as beautifully as you can, because normally if you play something beautifully, physically or technically things are working. Very seldom does somebody play with a beautiful sound and they're stressed. And so that's, I'd say simplify, experiment, and by experimenting, for example, I could say, let's say if we're talking about a B flat trumpet, E, F, G. Okay, so I could experiment where I just stay on E, and let the notes come out, or I could stay up on the G. There are a number of different ways that I would experiment with that, and when I'd experiment, I'd really try and do it while allowing myself to fail. So let's say if I stayed on the E and it didn't work very well, the G didn't come out or something, then I could try some other things, and I would eliminate several of my options, and then I could really bore in on the one thing that works well. And if that was a really difficult section that I wasn't sure that I could get, even if I was playing well, then what I would do is maybe write on my part, stay down or stay up, or do this or do that. So I think a lot of times, especially students, when they have trouble with a passage, their tendency is to play it over and over again, and they're sort of making the same mistakes. Yeah. I had this experience. I did some teaching at Indiana University, and there's one building there. It's very easy to get lost in this building, and it's a circular building. And I was trying to find a room, and so I did about 3 or 4 loops of this on this one floor. And there was a horn player that was practicing this high part from Beethoven's 7th. And every time I would come around, he was making the same mistake, and he just kept doing it over and over and over. Or she, I don't know who, and that's not the way to practice.
Yeah, I know that too. Then you have 20 versions that went wrong.
Yeah.
And then finally, one time you succeed, and then now I got it.
Yeah.
And it just
not
doesn't
quite
work that way.
Yeah.
And the next day you make one of these mistakes again.
Yeah. There's a story of Tiger Woods when he was really on top of the golf world, that the first tournament he won was the Masters, and he was 20 years old, and nobody had ever won it by 12 strokes. I mean, he just completely dominated the tournament. But he looked back on tapes and he said, my swing I don't like my swing, even though he just killed everybody in his tournament. He said, if my timing is good, like in other words, if you have good chops, if my timing is good, I'll do great. But if my timing is bad, I'm not going to be in contention. And so he remodeled his swing, and he might have gone like maybe 15 months without winning a tournament, and everybody said, you know, he's a flash in the pan and everything like that, because he was trying to make his swing much more effective. And then one night, it was very frustrating for him and everything, and one night he was on the driving range and he hit a ball that was perfect. And he thought, that's what I'm after. And then the next 30 minutes were not good, but then another ball was perfect, you know. And so I think that's the way we learn. There's this book called The Talent Code that talks about physically, you know that book, okay, physically what happens as we develop a skill, you know. And so I think you have to be willing to fail a lot, but maybe fail in very short sections and learn from that failure and keep correcting and getting better instead of just going over and over again.
Where some people have the idea you should be really relaxed on stage. But for me, being on stage is nothing to my idea of being relaxed on the sofa again. Yeah. Because it's always exciting. Yeah. To play there. So how would what would you tell somebody who has problems with?
I'd say if you say that somebody has problems with anxiety or being on stage playing, it's never that they're too relaxed. It's that they're too stressed. So I don't think we have to worry about somebody going on stage and falling asleep. Although I wrote one blog about this person, and then he wrote another blog. Glenn Fishtel, I don't know if you read that blog. He was he played first in the San Francisco Symphony for many years. Great trumpet player, and he's unbelievably relaxed. So they did, as an example, they did Mahler's Fifth at Carnegie Hall, and Ado DeVart, and Carnegie Hall, that's big time pressure, right? And Ado DeVart gave him the cue, nothing. You know, had his head down so he wasn't looking at Glenn, and just very dramatically gave the cue, nothing, no sound at all. You know, so he brought it back in, gave the cue again, nothing. And he looks up, and Glenn has his legs crossed, and he's talking to the second trumpet player. And the horn player, Dave Crable, went, "Hey, Glenn, conductor's on the podium," and Glenn sees him and goes, "Just a minute," and he finishes what he says, and then he plays Mahler's Second. And this is a true story because I asked Glenn about it, and the reason why I went, "Wait a minute," was he was telling a joke and hadn't come to the punchline yet. So he's that relaxed. So he had a time when he auditioned for the Kansas City Symphony, and he had been playing in the Hong Kong Philharmonic, and he flew, I guess, from Hong Kong to Kansas City or something, and played this audition. It was behind a screen, and so he won the audition. This is the amazing thing. So he played like 4 or 5 excerpts, you know, and they said, "Play Petrushka, do pictures, you know, do this." And then they said, you know, whatever excerpt, and there was nothing. And they said, "Could you, play Petrushka, please?" And then all of a sudden I heard, and he had fallen asleep behind the screen, and he still won the audition. So Glenn is maybe the only person where you'd have to say you need to be a little bit more tense, okay? But that's really an exception. So I think the way I look at it now is I had an experience, I think it was maybe, I forget exactly what year it was, but it was the first year of the Summit Brass. And I played in a quintet on one concert, a couple of fugues from the Art of the Fugue of Bach. And these were easy fugues, and they were pieces that I had recorded. So it was like a no-brainer for me, and I played terrible. I got really nervous because the people in the group, it was the first time I played with Ray Mace. Gail Williams was a horn player, Gene Picorni, who plays tuba with Chicago Symphony, and Ralph Sauer, who was first trombone with the LA Philharmonic. And it was his arrangement or orchestration of the Art of the Fugue. Anyway, I had this experience of playing very poorly on something that I should have been able to play with no problem at all. And so I started thinking about this, about the mental aspect of playing, and started listening to some tapes and reading some books and things like that. And my own opinion is that this is like any other aspect of playing the trumpet, if we're going to talk about trumpet specifically. So you have fingers, you have double tonguing, triple tonguing, single tonguing, flexibilities, high register, low register, sound, all these different things, all these different aspects of playing. And you could say in terms of talent, 1 to 10. 1 very poor, 10 absolutely great. And talent is what you naturally have. So let's say, for example, if with your fingers your talent level is 8, and suppose like my talent level is 6. If I work really hard and do a lot of fingering exercises and work smart, I can get to an 8, maybe even a 9. Maybe, and if you don't work at it, you stay at an 8, and maybe I can get better than you if I work really hard and smart. Okay, I think the mental aspect of playing is exactly the same thing. And the problem is nobody ever works on it. And it's always, gee, I sure hope I get better in the future. I hate being nervous on stage, and I hope I get better. Well, you don't say, I sure hope I get better with my fingers, but I'm never going to practice Clark or Vizzuti or whatever, or Nagel. You work on it, and you get better through working on it. And I think it's the same thing with nerves, shall we say, or the mental aspect of playing. And now these days, there are some people, I think there's a lot more information out there. Some of it maybe not so good, but there are some people who are really great with that, where you can get private lessons, or you can take a course or whatever. And maybe private lessons are expensive, but you take private lessons on the trumpet. So that's, if you say play to a level of 8 and you're taking an audition, but because you get nervous on the audition you play to a level of 5, then money invested in trying to learn the psychology of good performance, I think is money very well spent.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it's everybody's different, of course, and but I think that if you can approach this the way you would approach any other aspect of playing, I think you can improve it.
Do you have the secret tip?
The secret tip, yeah. Actually, this is not the secret tip, but actually, there was a comedian actor by the name of George Burns. I'm sure you don't know of him, but he was very famous, actually, probably in the 50s and 60s in the United States. Very funny guy, and he was also in some movies. There's a very cute movie he made with John Denver, who was a pop singer, called Oh God, where he played God, actually, like in the form of a human man. And somebody asked him once, he said, like, what's the secret of being a great actor? And he said, honesty. A lot of actors will say that. And he said, honesty. Once you can fake that, you've got it made, right? So, wow. I think, if students would look at this, I'd say one thing, and this is maybe too general, but it's really easy to think, this is something over the time I won't say I've learned, because it's just an opinion, so it's not a fact. But one thing I really believe in is that talent is overrated and hard work is underrated. And so if I think of people who have really great careers, I think it does them an injustice to say they're so talented, because it doesn't speak to the fact that they worked incredibly hard. And so I think for somebody to really develop into a good player, they have to be hungry and they have to be willing to work really, really hard. Because it's hard to get to become a professional musician these days, because there's so many players, good players, and there's so few jobs. So I think you have to be willing to work very hard. I think that's one thing I'd say, is that you have to be hungry. And there are a lot of, what I've seen in teaching in Europe is that there are a lot of people in Hochschules or academies or whatever who are comfortable, and comfortable is not close to doing enough. They think because I'm comfortable in the Hochschule, everything will be fine. But, you always have to keep pushing yourself. I think there's a wonderful story I heard about Derek Jeter, who was, over the past 20 years, was one of the most iconic baseball players. And when he went to, it's called spring training, which is before a season starts, where they get together and they work out. In his first year, it's called a rookie year, his first year, and he was with the top team, after about 2 weeks, he called his mother and said, I'm coming home. These guys are just so talented, I don't have a chance. And she said, they may all be more talented than you, but there's no excuse for any of them working harder than you. And he ended up becoming a Hall of Fame baseball player. And so I think, for me, it's pretty easy to spot the players who are going to be great or good and have a good career. And it's those players who are able to work harder and also smarter. But working hard, I think, is the main thing, being willing to put in a lot of time. And I'm sure there would be some people that would maybe disagree with me, but that's something for myself that I really believe in. You have to work smart, because there's some people that practice a lot and don't improve that much. But I think working really, if music's different from other professions, because I could study being a nurse or a school teacher for something, and I get out of the university and I have a job. As a trumpet player, you don't have a job, and there are many other people who, you know. Yeah. So, for example, like there's just thinking of one student up in Norway who's very talented and practices 2 hours a day. And so the question is, if this person makes the second round and then comes up against somebody who's as talented as he is or more talented, but that person practices 4 or 5 hours a day, to me, if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on the person that practices 4 or 5 hours, you know, as long as they're not stupid in the way they practice. So to me, if there's a secret, it's just if you want to have a career, go into a university or an academy thinking nobody's going to practice harder than I will. You know, Will Edward, when I had dinner with him, he talked to a couple of students beforehand. He was really great. Gave up 2 hours of his time almost, you know, to talk to these two students. And he talked about when he was a student. And I mean, basically he was the first person in school and the last person to leave. And this shows how old I am. But I have a student now in Norway whose father was a student with Ole Edward. And that's the first time I met Ole Edward, was when he was a student there and I was coming through doing some master classes. And they said, yeah, they'd be going out for dinner or a drink at 9 o'clock, you know, Ole Edward, come with us. And say, no, I'm going to practice. He knew what he wanted, you know, and he was willing to work harder than anybody else. Did you know that the 10,000 hour rule? Maybe you've heard of that. Okay. So, I mean, Håkan Hardenberger says he got his 10,000 hours in before anybody else because he was practicing 10 hours a day. I was practicing 6 hours a day, and I thought that was pretty good. And I heard Håkan 10 hours, and I thought, wow, okay. Yeah, but that's why he's Håkan Hardenberger. And people, you know, think, wow, he's so lucky, he's so talented and all of that. You know, and he is talented, obviously, no question about it. But I think if you'd say, Håkan, you're so lucky, you're so talented, he'd say, no, I worked hard, you know. And he still does. He still works really hard. So that would be if there's a secret, that's probably a secret nobody wants to hear. You know, it's like, take this pill and you won't have to practice. You know, if you find that, great, you know. In the future, who knows? Yeah, I mean, the way I'm going to write a couple of blogs about the future because things are changing so rapidly. And there's some people who are pretty good at predicting the future. And they're talking about like nanobots that we'll have in our body like in 20 or 30 years. So you could put a nanobot for War and Peace of Tolstoy, and it's immediately, you know, War and Peace. So who knows? There probably will be a pill for, you know, for all of this sort of thing.